What's up, everyone? Welcome to Ripstop on the Record. I'm Jameson.
And I'm Avery. This week on the podcast, we're talking with the managing director at Challenge Sailcloth, Hale Walcoff.
Now, you may be wondering who Hale Walcoff is, and that's totally fair. In short, he could be considered, one of the most influential men in outdoor fabrics, or he could be one of the best minds in modern textiles. I don't actually manage the voting for those accolades, so these are just generalizations. But I can say that he is the mind behind Ultra and ECOPAK fabrics, which are two of the hottest fabrics on the market right now.
And since they've released their outdoor division in 2020, Challenge Sailcloth has been blowing up. Their fabrics have been adopted and endorsed by companies you may have heard of, like Nashville Pack, Light AF, Hyperlight, Atom Packs, and Palante, just to name a few. But not only for backpackers, even hunting companies like Stone Glacier are trusting Challenge fabrics.
I've never heard of any of those people before in my life. Now, you may also just be hearing about Hale, but he's been working in the industry since the 80s. He's worked with Dyneema. He's worked for Dimension Polyant. He's worked with North Sails and now Challenge. He's bringing a plethora of experience to this episode, so there's a lot to listen to.
Yeah, and the primary topics we'll be covering are the Ultra and ECOPAK lines, including some user-submitted questions. Just a heads up, please excuse the background noise. Hale was kind enough to set up directly from his Challenge warehouse, so you might hear some background noise here and there. And also, this episode is long, but it's well worth the knowledge that you'll take away at the end of it.
Big time. If you're listening to the podcast right now, then there's a chance that you really like listening to other episodes. And there's also a chance that you can win one of three $100 RBTR gift cards. We're doing another survey. This one is not for the development of the company. This is just for the podcast. This is a fancy way to say that we really want to make the podcast better and we really want to make it worth your while as a listener. So if you really want a gift card or if you want to make your voice heard, then please go fill out this 2-minute survey by finding the link in the description.
That's all for now. Enjoy the episode.
Hale, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks. Great to be here with you guys.
We love the background that you have. We can't wait to hear more about it, but it's super exciting for us to see you in the warehouse. So we'll just go ahead and get right into it. Okay. You seem like a DIYer at heart. Can you tell us a story about a time that you made your own gear or an item or something of that sort?
Yeah, actually, I started out after school. I started out as a sailmaker. I realized I didn't want to work in the big city. And sailing means you get to be outside a lot. And I have never made a pack. I made some bags for sails. I'd like to make a pack kind of that's down the road. But I worked at a sail loft for about 12 years, a production manager there, and designed and built probably over 20,000 sails. So that was kind of my start in cutting and sewing fabric.
20,000. That is not a small number. And I know that we're going to get more into your background as well, which I think leads into Jameson's next question.
Thanks.
So you went to Tufts University where you majored in English. It's kind of a far cry away from textile development. Fast forward a few years, you're now kind of one of the authorities in the outdoor and the textile industry as a whole. How did you end up becoming a fabric expert?
Yeah, well, that kind of started with school. I went there and I didn't know that they actually raced. I came from Lake Champlain up in Vermont, where I'm back now. And I went to school and they had all this typical freshman orientation. And a guy down the hall said, "Hey, if you like, there's a lake here. We'd go sailing." I said, "I like to go sailing." So I bagged freshman orientation. I went sailing with a bunch of guys and they said, "Hey, what we do is every afternoon we meet out in front of this fraternity and we sail. And on the weekends you go to a race at Harvard or MIT or Naval Academy or somewhere." So I said, that sounds like fun. And I hadn't raced much and they were super experienced. And then I realized the classes I was taking, they had labs in the afternoon and you couldn't go sailing. So I switched and I found out English classes were in the morning and that meant I can go sailing in the afternoon.
That's awesome. That's hilarious. So what did you said you initially started out with labs. What was your first major when you went in?
Yeah, I was a geology major. And because I did a lot of being in Vermont, a lot of things between the mountains of Adirondacks in New York, and then the Green Mountains of Vermont, and then the lake, everything came from glaciers, and I studied that. I took courses in high school, and what happened is I took too many courses, so I placed out of all the freshman geology courses. And so they said, okay, well, you don't get to take geology for another year. You have to take physics and chemistry and calculus. I said, that has nothing to do with being outside. And they said, well, this is what you have to do. And then I failed all 3 classes. And so I said, all right, I'm not going to do this anymore. And then that's when I was able to switch to English. And the English thing was, they said, their theory was, if you can read and write, then you can do anything. So I said, okay, that sounds good.
Oh, that's amazing. We're off to a great start. Also, I did not know that you were from the Vermont area. So, I mean, you had the full immersion experience when you went from a fairly not densely populated part of the country to then going just north of Boston to Tufts. What was that experience like?
Yeah, that was really different. And I just went to a little public school. I actually started in a town called Plattsburgh, New York, which was on the New York side of the lake, and then my family moved to Burlington when I was in school. And I got there, and one of the things as a freshman, they said, well, 60% of the freshmen, went to prep school. Of course, I never even heard of a prep school. So I didn't know people went to schools other than public high school. But my parents sent me there in part because they said I was a hick from the country and I needed to get culture. They said Boston was the place in the United States that you get culture, which I'm not so sure about that, but it happened.
Well, you've continued that to go from just north of Boston at Tufts to then Connecticut. One of my oldest jokes, I'm also from the New England area, so I feel grandfathered in to be able to make this joke, is that Connecticut is no one's destination. It's just a road to get to New York or to get to New England. But since I've joined Ripstop by the role, I didn't realize how much was happening in the textile industry in Connecticut. So some would say there must be something in the water there. But I have 2 questions for you. One, what about Connecticut makes it a great place to make fabrics? And 2, is Connecticut a mid-Atlantic state or is it a New England state? Because I feel like it really depends on what half of the state you're actually in.
Yeah, you're right about that. So the basic Connecticut is New England, but the whole thing about fabric and sailcloth is just a coincidence because around Massachusetts and Connecticut and actually in New Hampshire, they had a lot of textile mills in the old days, these huge old brick buildings. And then in the probably early 1900s or something, then labor got expensive in New England and they all moved to Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. So they have all these huge empty textile buildings and most of them have high tech and other companies on now. But both Dimension was founded by a fellow named Jim Linville, who was a great sailor, in the years ago now. And he lived in Connecticut and found an old mill building in Putnam, started DP. And then Challenge Sailcloth was founded by Bob Bainbridge, which was I think about 35 years ago in the mid 80s. Bob, actually, his quick history of that is Bob's family, the Bainbridges, which started the first sailcloth company ever. His grandfather started the company in the early 1900s, and they were the premier sailcloth company in the world for many years. And then when Bob started working there, it was bought out by some venture capital guys. And then, as happens with most companies that get bought out, the founders and the families get kicked out pretty soon because the people that have all the money decide that they know what they're doing. And then even though you founded the company, you don't. So Bob went and started his own company with a partner named Terry Kronberg, a fabric technology engineer, and called it Challenge Sailcloth, as effectively a challenge to all the other guys out there. And then historian Bob has done really well. And then a few years ago, his son Ben joined him, who's now our president. And Bob still does a lot of R&D for the company, and Ben leads it. And it's essentially a family company. It's not owned by some big business guys or bank that tells you what to do. So it's kind of neat on a freewheeling basis. We're kind of a small company. We feel like we're a 3 or 5 person, little backpack company, but we just happen to make most of the actually woven Dacron sailcloth in the world, kite surf fabrics, and many other things like that. It's grown.
I had no idea of the history of Challenge. I didn't realize it had went back that far. So that's really fascinating. But you mentioned something about sailors there, and I want to touch on that a little bit deeper as well. Your bio says that in 2020, Challenge launched a new company called Challenge Outdoor, spearheaded by a world champion sailor and textile expert, yourself. So when it comes to fabric, it seems like sailors do it best. What have you learned through sailing about how to make excellent fabrics, and specifically for the outdoor industry?
So outdoor, of course, sailing is also an outdoor sport, but sailing is all about, the type of sailing I did. I was in Marblehead, Massachusetts, a company called North Sails. There's currently still the big sail maker in the world. And we made racing sails for small boats. And we did it for US, champions. We made Olympic sails for gold medalists in the Olympics, things like that. And it was all about, and this has to do with packs too, a sail fabric is an integration between the design, the fabric, and the construction. So everything has to work harmoniously together to be fast and also to be durable. And also sails had to be as lightweight as possible while being strong. This is kind of goes more towards like the ultralight backpacking area. And then the same thing I'll say when I talk to guys about pack fabric, I said, the fabric has to work well with your design and with your construction. You can't sew something an ultralight fabric, which could be Ultra, it could be DCF, from DSM. You can't treat that the way you would a 1,000 denier cordure and expect it to survive, with a big needle and large thread and all that. And it's just a different animal. So we learned sailing early on. We used very lightweight materials that you would have a 1/2 ounce material in a sail called a spinnaker, which is for going downwind, with 1,000 square feet of this huge thing, but carefully reinforced in the corners and layered in the corners, and it could propel a 50,000-pound boat, no problem. But if you take that same material in your hand, you could rip it like a sheet of paper. So it's all about working properly with the materials and having them perform the best possible. So that branched off partly too. The way I got to know the sailcloth makers is for racing sails, the materials were not always there that worked well with our designs. So the two people we worked mostly with, one was Bob Bainbridge, who had Challenge, and for getting materials. And then the other was John Glick, who was the president of Dimension Poly and Sailcloth. And John also raced with us a lot, and a good friend kind of growing up. And he would custom make all kinds of materials for us because we became from a 3-person company to, we probably had at our peak, which was actually big for a sailmaker. There was probably a dozen people, but we did everything by hand. There was no cutting machines. And we became the biggest small boat racing sail manufacturer in the world. That's why went back into the early question. Yeah, we made 20,000 sails, and these were done by hand. So like 2,000 sails a year is about what you can produce.
Wow. That's incredible. So it seems like one of the things I'm taking away from you there is the way that sails are constructed is sort of I don't want to say the original, because there's been backpacking, since people could hike, but something that I see a lot of similarities in is the kind of what Carter refers to as flexible minimalism, like this ability to strip down a fabric as much as possible while still giving it just enough attributes to be highly performing. Because you do have that incredible balance of weight. I mean, most sails are large, even on a small boat. You're talking about, I don't even know, probably upwards of 10 or more yards of fabric that can get incredibly heavy very quickly.
Sure. Yeah, that's right. So lightweight is super important, and low stretch. Those are things that key. Lightweight, low stretch, tear strength, a lot of things same as you would have it for pack fabric.
So we received a lot of customer questions about the carbon footprint and sustainability of Challenge fabrics. And as an avid outdoors person and a previous geology student, I imagine that you've seen the effects of harmful chemicals and production practices in natural places. And there's a consistent theme with Challenge fabrics, which is eco-friendly materials. Can you tell us about how you've made no compromises that are still kind to the planet?
Yeah, sure thing. For me, the reality was, maybe because I wasn't kind of an outside person, sailor and hiker and stuff and paddler, that ideas come in quiet moments or spontaneously with conversations with a friend, like, hey, so John and I, the DP would start at 8 a.m. and John and I would usually be in there together at 7, the only guys there. And I'd go in his office and look at all the sailing pictures on his wall, and we just talk about sailing and throw around fabric ideas. And virtually all the material developments that I had at DP started with those conversations with John. And then he was a great mentor and influence, because besides being the guy that in the sailcloth industry, he designed virtually every sailcloth, high-tech sailcloth in the world for 30 years, he probably did it. And then before he retired. But I learned from him that there are no limits. You have to be a free thinker. You have to think outside the box, and you have to try and fail. And even if you don't succeed, it's no big deal. You just try again. Whereas most big companies, the philosophy is if you try and mess up, you're going to get penalized. And John was just totally opposite. the thing I got from him was to think outside the box and don't be afraid to try new things. And John retired and we went on, and I was able to do a lot of other materials, with DP in different markets, which was fun. And then John retired in the middle of 2019, and I kind of feel like some spark had gone out, and I said, I've done this a lot. I realized I'd driven over 400,000 miles in 10 or 12 years just to get to work and back. And I didn't think that was a very good environmental statement on my part to be somebody that was in the outdoor industry. Even though I drove a Prius, it just still burned up a lot of gas. So I said, all right, it's time to stop that. And I talked to my wife, and she was kind of a freelancer, and she had a good gig for the summer. She says, just take the summer off. So I said, okay, I can do that. And I just thought about stuff. And then this was thinking about, hey, kind of like this fabric thing still, but I'd like to, if I do it again, I'd like to do it recycled. This is like going back to school and saying, if I could take that test again, I could do much better the next time. So I was able to do it again. So that was the start of that. And at the time, what I did for North is back to the materials and how it all happened is I'd done a ton of research for North and realized that the woven polyester recycled products were really good. In fact, in the bigger deniers, they were as good or better than virgin nylon, which most packs are. And then we also worked on a recycled film at the time, which we found, but recycled film right then wasn't quite as good as virgin film, but it was close. And so we had some products there. And then when I got to challenge, we said, we have to have all the components be better. So, and then the other thing is North did their own laminating. It was actually in Sri Lanka. And their laminating is the same. And actually, the head of their laminating had worked at Dimension before me. So there was the same laminating system. It was solvent-based adhesives. And if you've ever been around a lot of solvents, either, with products, it's really toxic stuff in the air. To breathe it, you don't want to do that. If it goes on your skin, it goes right to your kidneys. And it's really bad for the air and the land and the water. So there's nothing good about it except like a lot of things in manufacturing, it works to laminate products together. And so the other thing about it is it's very energy intensive because you put the solvent-based adhesive on something and it goes through a drying oven that's like 60 feet long. And you evacuate all these bad fumes and you have to burn them off in an incinerator. And then you have to cure the fabric in a hot room for 3 days at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're using a lot of energy along the way to make this product. Even if it was all recycled components, it's still energy intensive and it still is toxic. And so the one thing that Challenge had, two things. One is I got there and we said, you know what, this recycled film, we can do better. And I worked with a film company in Asia, and we developed a challenge called Challenge RUV film. Just stands for recycled UV, but it's 97% UV resistant, and there's no other film in the world like it. And the reason is that it's great for outdoor products like sailing and kite surf and also some pack fabrics because it lasts 5 times longer in the sun than conventional film used by other companies. So it is recycled, but it's actually also better. It lasts longer, which was one of our goals. We didn't just want to have a recycled thing that wasn't going to be as good. We said we need to have everything for the customer so they could feel good about it. And then the other thing is the adhesive system was really developed in conjunction with our engineer in our China factory where the fabric was made, is to not contain solvents. And there's other industries that use really strong adhesives, but there's no solvents. And that's what this is. So there's no drying oven, there's no hot room, there's no pollution in the air. You can be around it and it's fine. And so we felt that would be a progressive step for the outdoor industry if we could take the solvents out of the equation. A lot of people try to do in like the airlines, you go out and you pollute, you burn the jet fuel and say, okay, I felt bad about it. I'm going to go buy carbon tax credits and now I'm going to be carbon neutral. And that's a good thing for people that don't have a choice. But on the other hand, we said, okay, we could do that too, but I think it's better to start out by not polluting. And so that was one of our goals is from the beginning, let's say we could do the progressives, we could go out and pollute and and pay the tax, or we could just not even pay the tax because we're not going to pollute to start with. So that was kind of the genesis of the whole program, is to look at every element. And then so it was like the third time I got to do it. The North Sales was in between, and then to have the progressive step with this non-toxic adhesive was a huge leap. And that was something that the challenge guys have as a proprietary material.
That is extremely fascinating and a lot of information there for people listening. So I'm glad that this is a podcast because I know I'm already like, wait, rewind. I want to hear more. So I have a few questions that came up there. I know that I watched the video on the Challenge Sailcloth page. I believe it's Bottles to Fiber, the Magic of Reprieve. And it was super fascinating for anyone who is interested in Challenge and the recycling process and how many plastic bottles that are recycled. So is this process happening in the United States, or where is Challenge Sailcloth being produced? Is it in one specific area? Is the eco process happening in another area? Just a little bit more curious about that as well.
Yeah. So yes, so on that, basically, Reprieve, they're in the United States, and I don't know if it's a U.S. brand or not, but they have a huge factory. They do some recycling in the U.S., but the primary recycling is done for Reprieve is done in China. And that's where almost all recycled materials are really made in Asia these days. And that's where the companies like Patagonia, North Face, all those guys that are using recycled materials, they're generally coming from Asia factories. There's not enough production in the U.S. to do that. And our laminating is actually in China. Our factory, we have factories in Thailand. We do most of our weaving of sailcloth and kite surf and other materials there. We have some production in the United States. And then we have this production in China. The China reason is because our engineer that developed this system without the toxic solvents is based in China. And the other thing is because I learned most of all the small do-it-yourselfers, the small brands are in the U.S. You make it at home in your garage or whatever. But all the big pack companies and even a lot of the U.S. brands now, the smaller ones are manufacturing in Asia because there's not the availability of cut and sew in the United States. It's just something that's really gone more offshore. And a friend of mine that runs a pack company, he offered people, he said, I'll pay you $30 an hour to sew these backpacks. It's like more than double minimum wage. And people said, no, thanks, I'm not interested. So he asked me, hey, can you find an Asia factory? So we're doing it in Asia because that's kind of where the technology is. But also all the big pack companies are in Vietnam and the Philippines and in China that are building these packs and bags. And we looked at the environmental impact of it. And I have a friend at Patagonia that worked with me on this. He said, hey, you should manufacture in Asia because to make the raw materials in Asia, ship to the US, across the ocean or air freight if you're late, and then just stick a couple layers together and then pack it up and ship it all the way back to Asia, he said, is a terrible way to go. So he said, you should just make it once in one place, and then it goes to an Asia factory, and then it can go to Patagonia or North Face or whatever the brand is. And so we kind of follow that model. We do obviously ship stuff in stock in the US for smaller brands. So that's a one-way shot, but we aren't shipping twice around the world.
Right. I mean, for procurement, that definitely makes more sense, especially if you're trying to be sustainable, make this fabric, shipping it back and forth across the country does not make sense. I kind of have a off the cuff question real quick, something that you mentioned that you said the world wasn't ready for eco fabrics. I believe it was in 2008. 2008. What do you think has changed? I know it's kind of like a broad question. There's no right or wrong answer, but what do you think has changed between 2008 when maybe the world wasn't ready for eco fabrics and now we're sitting in 2022 and it seems like that's a lot of what people are talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things. One is that the quality of the product in 2008, I don't think was there. So you can, in my feeling, like sales and marketing, whatever overall, is you have to have a product that's at the right product at the right price, and that does what it's supposed to do for your customers. And basically at that time, the quality of the recycled raw materials weren't there. We could stick all the layers together and make a fabric, but it really wasn't that good a material. And the same thing with sailcloth. Recycled sailcloth has just been a dream, and really until this last year, and I'll get to that in a minute. But basically, overall, just the worldwide acceptance of these things. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with the climate change. And certainly, I know being back in Vermont, we just had it the other morning was 15 below zero, and took my dog for a walk, and it hasn't been 15 below zero there for 5 years. And when I grew up in Vermont, the only time they ever closed up there, they closed school one week. It was 20 below every day, and that was the high. That was common. We would drive our cars out on 2 feet of ice on the lake, which is the size of Long Island Sound. No big deal. And now it's a big news story if the lake even freezes over. It's not enough good ice to skate. So the climate has totally changed the last 20 or 30 years. And I think partly as a result, people are receptive. They can go outside, they can see it. And part of the reason I moved to Vermont again is because I wanted to experience real winter. I lived in Rhode Island, I was also in Connecticut for years. It was just a slushy winter. It was, you couldn't go outside and do anything except, so it was, so it's changed. People's thought has changed. And I think it's a grassroots effort. It's not a political effort. I think the politicians just do whatever they need to do. I'm not a very political persuasion. I just think they do what they want to keep in power and to get reelected, and they'll change their position if, based on what time of day it is. But I think it's up to every citizen. If you feel important, the environmental stuff is important, that you will try to make changes yourself. And I grew up doing that in Vermont. We would go hiking, and there'd be stuff on the side of the road, and we'd be picking it up because it was a mess. And then soon afterwards, they had the first bottle bill in the country for 5 cents. You could recycle a can or a bottle of something, and all of a sudden, all the roads were clean because nobody was going to throw away 5 cents. But it has to be a grassroots change, I think, overall. And that's why the material, I think, is now going to be accepted, because the quality of the material is there, and because people are aware that every little bit does make a difference.
So I have a question about the laminating, which I know is backwards a little bit, but it seems like that's one of the areas that has been keeping kind of the industry back in some ways, that it can be very difficult to layer the desired face and the backing together to make that fabric. What can you tell us about your process at Challenge that has given you this unique ability to put a UHMW PE woven with polyester face with that RUV backing? Is normally marrying those, or in other places, at least what we know of, we haven't seen that too much.
Yeah. The reason for that is in particular for just overall to laminate stuff is kind of no big deal if you have good machinery, which is hard to do. You can't really do it yourself at home, but you need the right temperature and pressure to stick things together, and all the fabric companies have these big laminating machines, which is essentially you run stuff through, you put glue on, and you have what's called a nip, which is a heated rollers, which are 2 rollers that run reverse to each other, so your material goes down and through, and one side is heated to 300 Fahrenheit or whatever temperature they need, and just in that process of going through, it squeezes the layers together under 10,000 pounds of pressure, and then you have a single fabric as a result. And if you put the right amount of glue and you cure it properly and all that, then it's not going to come apart. And that's different. That works well. Basically, overall for polyester, works really well because polyester sticks really well to virtually all adhesives. Nylons, it doesn't work very well because nylon as a fiber is different than polyester. It wicks a lot of moisture, and you require, just in a standard lamination, you might require 50% more adhesive to laminate nylon than polyester. And then you still don't have as good a bond when you go to pull it apart. The differences are, what we call Ultra, and it's a very strong fiber, we all know now, but it's also very slippery, and so its slippery quality which is good in abrasion, also means you can't glue to it. There's nothing there in the fiber to absorb glue like nylon or polyester. So therefore, what we do in the weaving, and this started in our sailmaking days, people wanted Dyneema type sails, or Ultra, we call them then. And you couldn't have a woven that you stuck to anything because the glue would just fall apart. And we would use twice as much adhesive, and it still didn't matter. So then what we learned is you had to weave part of the fabric with polyester, and then you had to have the right percentage of polyester, and it had to be balanced in the weave, and then the glue would stick to the polyester, and then the Ultra type fiber was along for the ride. It would hang in there. So the second part of that is that the adhesive system, and I did some of that at DP and also when I was at North Sales, but we had to use twice as much adhesive as we would use on a normal fabric because of the Ultra fiber. But solvent-based glue is very thin, and and so it doesn't squeeze around the fibers very well. So we just had to use a lot of it. Moving on to the adhesive we have now, the reason it works is partly because how we design the weaves, which we learned how to do a better job over time, and then but our adhesive it has about 30% better bond strength at the same weight as a solvent-based adhesive. And we learned this through testing. We also did a lot of early sailcloth, and the sailmakers would come back to us and say, "My gosh, your fabric sticks together so much better than the other laminated fabric. You know, why is that?" And it's because our glue system was developed not for sailing, but for another industry, and which required really high sticking ability. And so we can either use the same amount of glue as solvent based and have 30% better bond, or we can use a third less glue and get the same bond, depending what the product needs. Some products don't need it. Some products don't get beat up a lot. Like a windsurf sail, for example, never gets wrinkled and and it just gets rolled up at the end of the day. So we found you could use very little glue in that because it didn't delaminate. So it's the weave and the glue system are the two things that combine together to get a very good bond.
Is there any effect that the gluing has on the total weight? For instance, you mentioned a couple fabrics that you said you had to use a lot more adhesive. Would that alter the weight greatly, or is that fairly minimal?
It alters the weight greatly. So an average amount might be, depending what you're laminating, might be an ounce a yard. So if you have a 5-ounce fabric, you might be adding an ounce of components of layers. You might add an ounce, 3/4 of an ounce, or an ounce of glue. And one of the ways I can't give you the exact number because it's confidential, but in our Ultra fabric, like for the kite surf and part of the Ultra 200, which we can talk about later, that one was actually designed for kite surfing and wings, which go up in the air and have to be really light and strong. And every gram, every ounce matters. It's like the guys that are fanatical about their bikes. You get the next level of Shimano gear on your bike because it's going to save you, 5 grams or an ounce or whatever it is. And even though you get a cheeseburger for lunch, it feels really good that your pedals are lighter. So that's because when I wanted to get really nice, Shimano Ultra for my bike, my wife says, "You don't need to eat that cheeseburger, just go for a ride."
The classic dilemma. You got to get 2 beers when you stop, but you're still going to get the lightest carbon seat post.
That's critical. Absolutely. So anyways, sorry about that for the distraction.
It hits home here. I get it.
Okay. So the weight's a factor. So we can use in our Ultra products, we can use, I think it's probably half as much glue as I would use if it was solvent-based with the same weave, which makes a huge difference. Some difference in backpack, but a huge difference in these kites that go up in the air. And in our testing, with that minimal amount of glue, the bond strength to these Ultra fabrics is better than you get as just a basic laminated, nylon polyester. So we get like twice the bond. So that's never been done before. And I'm not saying that the stuff falls apart. They do a fine job laminating, but I'm saying we can use in a highly technical slippery material half the glue that they use, and for our customers, that's just super important to be at that level. And it also obviously, as with the rest of the Ultra products, the Ultras they're expensive. To get anything to be the lightest and the strongest just cost more. People say, why are all these Ultra fabrics expensive? Why is the DCF expensive? It's because of the time and the materials and everything. To make really light materials of any nature is much more time consuming than a lot of heavier material.
Gotcha. Yeah, that is incredibly fascinating because especially with any laminate composite fabric, that's kind of been the concern forever, right? Since they came out, people are like, "Oh, does this delaminate, or will this delaminate, or can I delaminate it?" So talking about that lamination specifically and how that could be 30% stronger is really crucial because again, it's everyone's concern, and especially with stitch elongation, with stitch holding power, like those are they're not the same, but they do feel akin to one another because as you start to create those needle holes, normally that's where the delam starts, right?
And that still can happen. We've had that in some of the early fabric. And one thing we realized is that we're used to working with sail makers and guys that do kites and windsurf sails, and they've known for years how to work with ultralight materials. Backpack guys generally don't. That's not their forte. Even guys, I have friends that are designers at big brands, and a lot of them never even made a pack. They're just sitting at a computer, with a program and designing a really nice looking pack. So the thing there is that, and I think I sent a thing to you guys, right? We want to share it after talking to different brands. We had a couple problems early, like 2 packs that I'm aware of early on, and it was totally a manufacturing issue where this ultralight fabric, the seams need to be reinforced in some way. Basically, simply the best thing is to do a flat fell seam where you stitch it, fold it over, and stitch the flap down, and then over that it should be reinforced with, if you want it waterproof. Right now, I would say you should use DCF tape. I think that works pretty well. And if it doesn't have to be waterproof, but just really water resistant, we have a tape that we use called insignia tape for sails. Like it's much less expensive than DCF, but it's probably not. I totally tested. It's probably not waterproof, but it protects the seam. And the other thing is it helps spread the load of the seam just a little bit. It's a small addition, but it makes a big difference. So we do have recommendations on using the material so that people are happy overall. Because I have guys saying, "Hey, I was just sewing 1,000 in your Cordura with a number 20 or 22 needle, and I went and used the Ultra 200, and it's just punch these big holes in." I'm like, "Yeah, it's like you're driving a nail through this fabric. You just kind of can't do that." In sailmaking, we would always call it also, and virtually all packs are made with straight stitches, and things like sailmaking, you would never use a straight stitch, because in any of these materials, we'd say that's caused the fabric to rip on a dotted line like a sheet of perforated paper in a notebook. That's what you're doing. You're punching. You're putting thread in to hold things together, but at the same time, you're perforating a very firm material. If you have a 1000D or 500D Cordura, it's a kind of a loosely woven with large yarns, and the needle often just goes even between the yarns. As soon as you laminate something, then the tear strength goes way down. For example, if you wanted to cut Kevlar or Ultra like on a table and it wasn't laminated, you couldn't. I don't care how kind of scissors, you couldn't cut it. It just wouldn't work. As soon as you laminate it, what happens is it locks the fibers together. If you hold the fibers in straight together, that allows you to cut the fabric. So that's what we do in laminating. It allows us to cut the fabric, for sails or packs or whatever. But also, if I just want to even cut a sample, for a friend of mine wanted, "Hey, I want to see the weave before we're doing custom weaves of the Ultra for guys." And they'll say, "I want to see it." So the way to cut that is you put masking tape down both sides. You cut down the middle of your scissors, and just masking tape itself. It's just fundamental to show how it locks the fibers together to enable them to be cut. You just put down inch masking tape, you cut down the middle of it, no problem.
Wow.
So that goes to the strength of materials and use of materials. And that's also why it goes back to before this, as soon as you laminate a fabric, I don't care if it is Kevlar or Ultra, laminate it, the tear strength goes down. And you have to be careful about how you build the seams, how you attach the shoulder straps, the webbing, bar tacks, any of those things generally need to be reinforced on an ultralight material.
All of that is very fascinating. And as a social media manager, I would love to see your best tips. I know you mentioned flat felled seams and the reasoning behind that, because I personally get asked these questions all day long.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm happy to send that to you.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And I know all the listeners and all the other gear and fabric nerds would love to hear that well. So that kind of leads me into the next question. And you just touched on it briefly, but high-end fabrics obviously require sometimes specific care instructions to preserve the integrity of the fabric. And you mentioned the flat felled seam is one of those. Are there any more examples of that for the Ultra or ECOPAK lines?
No, I would just say, just overall, and this comes from racing sailboats. So if you get a small tear or something, you need to fix it right away. I had a guy with a pack, and it was he had something through a stitch hole with Ultra fabric, and it started to propagate, and he didn't do anything. All you need to do, you can just put duct tape or packing tape or something on the film side, and that'll just hold it together as a temporary repair. But just to be careful. And all these fabrics, I think, whether it's Ultra or DCF or whatever, they take care. They perform really well, but you can't treat them like an old JanSport backpack and kick it down the hall. It's just not going to work. In terms of cleaning and stuff for people, it's just basic. We say clean with a mild soap and a sponge or a towel or a cloth, and then just rinse with fresh water, and don't dry it artificially. Just let it air dry. I did in our early days of our Ultra, I think it was with the 200, we did a test for a customer. They wanted to know if it was going to stay laminated. So it was last winter, I put it outside. It was like 0 or 10 degrees overnight. Then you follow it up and see it didn't. Normally, if something gets really cold like that, it'll delaminate. It didn't. But I just took it upstairs, threw it in the washing machine with some towels and stuff, and just washed it through a normal cycle. And normally this whole wash test will delaminate a fabric if the layers aren't stuck together. If you have polyester on both sides, then it'll stay together because the materials wick up moisture. Similarly, as soon as you put nylon on one side, it falls apart. The nylon absorbs water and stretches, and you open up the washing machine, and the fabric's just blown apart. It just has to do with the type of materials that go in. With the Ultra, that was laminated. We put it in the washing machine, checked it was fine. We put it in the dryer in high temperature for half an hour, take it out. It was like new. So it never delaminated. It didn't get any holes. I'm not saying people should run out and throw their packs in the machine, but we did that as kind of a severe test that I don't think there's any other pack fabric that out there that would survive that.
Yeah, that is next level. I don't even know if I have any words on that one, but now it gets pretty cold where I live, so I'm going to start sticking things outside in the snow and just seeing what happens for fun. Yeah.
So it's not generally recommended to wash your pack.
I'm going to keep that in mind next time. Yeah, just in case.
Okay, so going off on that and how to take care of fabrics, another question I get all the time is often about seam taping fabric. So this question is another user question that we got, and NT Outside wanted to know if Challenge made a brand specific seam tape or if you stock one that works.
Yeah, so we just have what I think I briefly mentioned before, this Insignia tape, which is a 1-inch tape. It's just a 70 denier. It's a lightweight polyester with PSA, with pressure sensitive adhesive. So you peel off the paper backing. It's like a roll of Band-Aid. You peel off the backing and you just stick it down. A Band-Aid just has pressure sensitive adhesive, and that's what we use. And that's kind of a low cost way to reinforce sails and kites and things. And the true the DCF tape, we do not have anything like that this time. We're thinking maybe later in the year, if we have a lot of people that ask for it, we could do that. But right now we don't do a special tape that's very strong and very waterproof.
Good to know. So in the coming weeks, we will be releasing Challenge ECOPAK line, which we are stoked about. And for listeners that don't know about ECOPAK, what can they look forward to or get excited about?
Yeah. So a little bit, we talked earlier, this is the first pack fabric that's really 100% recycled components. The stuff other people have done historically have some recycled, which is good. I think it's a step forward. But we tried to be 100% recycled in the components, and then also to have this non-toxic adhesive that would hold everything together. So we've done that, and in the basic fabric, which is like around a 6 ounce, which is the EPX 200, and EP just stands for ECOPAK, and X just means there's an X in it. And I don't know if you guys got it, but the EPLX just means ECOPAK Light, which just means it has a film backing. The lighter fabrics don't hold stitching as well as the heavier ones, but they're the waterproof film, and they usually cost about $2 less a yard. But in EPX 200, we have, and you probably don't have it this time, but we now have 21 colors in stock. That is the most popular fabric, and everybody. And as I go around, and when you talk about the whole product development thing, and obviously, I don't have all the answers, but what I think the important thing in product development is you have to understand the materials, and then the second thing is you have to be a good listener, because the customers are always going to tell you what they want and what the right thing is. And if you're and that might be the only smart thing I've really done is that I just listened to customers and I went back, I wrote it down and went back and said, okay, this is what we need to change, because I just met with Andrew at Palante Packs, and he made the pack and told me what we need to do for the next Ultra fabric. He was the early adopter Ultra 400 for us, and then came back and gave me lots of great ideas to move on for there. And that's the same thing, the colors. I meet with guys and they say, hey, why don't you have pink or fuchsia or navy blue or whatever? And so I said, okay, I think we could do that. And so what we do is we have a ton of colors now, and we'll see how those go. And if people have more ideas down the road, we're happy to stock them. And then maybe gradually over time, if somebody really didn't like the pink after all, then I might have to send it all to you, and then we'll close it out.
Perfect.
I love that you work with these smaller cottage pack companies, because as a backpacker myself, we have a lot of time to think about things when you're walking 20 miles a day. So that just really hit home for me. But I'm excited to see all the new colors of the ECOPAK line. I know that people are really looking forward to it, and it's been something that you kind of can't get away from right now. People are just talking about it, using it in all of their gear. So I'm stoked to see what our customers come up with and designs that they create. And I'm sure that you feel equally excited as having designed it to see people create the gear out of the fabric, which if people are watching this video, they can see all the cool gear that you're kind of standing around that we've been looking at this whole time. So thanks for having that set up as well. It's great to see the visual of kind of what people can potentially make.
Yeah, here's the pink flamingo, special just for you.
I love it. I'll do all pink gear every day. Jameson asked me my favorite color the other day, and I was like, rainbow, like every color. I'm one of those people where I'm like, I don't want black, I don't want white, but I want just like any atrocious bright color. So I will be making a rainbow something with all the eco fabric for sure.
Yeah. That sounds great. And let us know if we missed any of the colors. We're happy to do something for you.
I want to talk about.
Go ahead.
I want to talk about that gear that's in front of you there. Can you plug the companies that are represented on your desk?
Sure. So I'll start. This one is a little fanny pack from Flowfold. So friends of mine up in Maine. They're mostly a New England brand, but they pretty readily adopted the recycled materials. So their customers there are super psyched about it. And so I've known Charlie Friedman for years up there. He's a big hiker, and he's a big kite surfer too. And he gives me tons of ideas and feedback. So I always appreciate what he's done there. And then we have a duffel here from Hyperlight Mountain Gear, who's the premier brand of ultralight for many years. And I've known those guys for a long time. And Joe Novak's a new developer there, and he's working with me on some materials, and they're testing them, and versus the DCF they do. This is their big brand that they use. And so we're going to kind of wait and see what happens. But he was kind enough to get me a duffel that I could test it out too with the Ultra 200. And then a bunch of these little toilet kits. Whenever we have a new material, there's a fellow, and he's just a one-man band, is David Valenchik at D-Made Bags in Ohio. And it's kind of his sideline. It's not his primary business, but he, like a lot of backpack guys, he crafts different items, and he gives me tons of feedback. And so we usually, whenever a new material, like he was the first one to get the Ultra 100, where he got the pink flamingo and makes a top kit out of it, and then he gives me feedback, so that helps a lot. And then we have here is a Palante pack that from Andrew Benson. He's working from the beginning. He started with a 400, and then he had 800 reinforcements. And he's one of the reasons he and then Chris Millard of Light AF, they helped with the development with the 200. Where the 200 came about really for kite surfing. That was our idea, because Ben Bainbridge, a huge part of our company, is devoted to kite surfing, and those guys were looking for a high-end material that would kind of elevate their sport. So we basically designed this with the ideas for kite surfing, and then in talking with Andrew at Palante and then Chris at Light AF, they say, hey, the 400 is great, but you know what? We'd like something, 3.5 ounce range, and that would be great if you could do that. I said, well, we're doing this for kites, but it might work for you too. So we got them some material, they tested it, and gave us a lot of great feedback. And then part of that, to go back to the development cycle, they came back for the 100. They and somebody else said, you know what, if we could have a sub 3 ounce fabric, that would be good. And I said, it's going to be really expensive. They said, okay, well, let us know what you think it'll be. And we'll let you know if it works. So that we just got some out in the last few weeks, the 100, the Ultra, and guys came back with really good feedback. And then we connected with you and Kyle that Ripstop, I think, will be carrying it going forward. You'll be the first major outlet for Ultra 100 in the world. And at this time, people have asked, and we're only doing it in the Storm Gray, where it's kind of a test thing to see how it works. But we want it to be a unique thing that people saw the pack, that they would know it was a very special material, that they had also used all their lunch money on one pack, so that they saved up. So we realize it's near and dear, but we think that it'll really perform for them. So we got the Palante D-Made, and then this was at friends out in Seattle, Swift bike bags. I've done a lot of work with them, and then actually Rebel 8 Design. I don't have a bag here, but Rebel 8 out of Alaska. And Rebel 8, if you know Eric Parsons at all, he was like the starter around 2010 of bike packing. It's like nobody ever heard of it before. And he designed the first frame bags, and virtually everybody else copied or modified his designs. And he was a nice enough guy not to complain too much. But he's not I don't think he's the biggest brand in bike bags, but he's a total innovator. And we're working on several custom materials with Rebel 8 Design that at some point in the future that we can bring to the mass market if they work. And the last one is a new company, Alpine Sea, out of Hood River. They make a lot of tote bags. They have a little storefront, and it's what happened. Partly they're there because of COVID. They were designers, husband and wife were designers for Dakine. And Dakine shut their Hood River office, which was kind of a bummer, because if you've ever been to Hood River, they have the most amazing office in the world, looking over the river and onto the mountains of Washington State. And they got that shut down, but they started their own company called Alpine Sea, and they're using a good amount of the ECOPAK in their bags, and giving me lots of feedback.
That's fantastic. Thanks for telling us those. Also, I just got to plug you for a brief moment myself. I really like Carter calls me really boring. I really like the blacks, the grays, the whites. I like things to be fairly neutral, let's call them. But we are planning a bike packing trip coming in May, Carter, Isaac, and I am using your 400 in the blue because I was particularly drawn to that. So that blue is stunning. But I also have to plug you because Carter has been in the industry for 6 or 7 years now, and nothing excites him. But I haven't seen him as excited in a while as your 100. He was actually properly stoked about your Ultra 100 and was really excited to work with that. He's already used it for a couple of sewing projects that he's been working on, but I haven't seen him so excited about a fabric in a while. So I just got to plug you guys a little bit there, that even the old guys are getting stoked about some of your new fabrics.
Well, thanks. Yeah, the 100 is kind of unique, and it has this super silky feel. I get that. I work with a designer actually in Italy, and he liked the technical properties. He said, "Hey, but my wife said it's the smoothest fabric that's ever been made, and she loves that of it." So it has kind of side properties you don't always expect.
Yeah. So another user question, and another question that a lot of us are probably asking is, will Ultra or will Challenge be coming out with some lighter fabrics? Maybe things like 0.5, 0.6, 0.8, maybe stuff for shelters and future applications for DIYers and cottage vendors. What do you think about that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. We do have Ultra tent and tarp fabric in process, and the lightest is probably going to be wave one. It's called 0.95, and then we have Ultra, we call it TNT for tent and tarp, Ultra 0.95 and Ultra 1.2. We're making a couple of versions, and for kites, for both tents, tarps, and also it'll probably be for our kite business. We'll try to have a crossover product. So that's actually in process. It took us, because of the world shortage of materials, it took us 6 months to get the film and stuff from DuPont. They made it special in Luxembourg for us, and we just received it at our factory. And we hope in February at some point we'll have the first Ultra TNT, and we're gonna have guys, a couple of key customers are gonna test it and let us know if we've got the design right, and then we'll get it out to the market. But I would say, back to your original question, we're not gonna have a 0.5 or 0.8 ounce material, at least not right now, because the technology to get there for the Cuban fiber is totally unique. And at this time, there's nothing else in the world like it.
So as we're closing up here, you have the ear of all these listeners, MYOGers, DIYers at home, cottage companies listen to the episode. What's something that we haven't talked about yet or we haven't covered that you just want to know about your company? You'd want them to know a little bit more about Challenge yourself.
Yeah. So I might have said before, Challenge is kind of unique in the industry because now they're a relatively large fabric supplier, worldwide supplier. it's just a family business, and it's run like a family business. There's not a lot of corporate structure. There's not a lot of corporate meetings. I mean, everything is back. I feel like I'm back to when I was in the first Sailcloth when we had 3 people. There was myself, I was like head of it. The guy that hired me, he was a really good sailor, and I learned from him. And he and I, we cut sails, and then we had one woman take one sewing machine, and she sewed the sails. And that was kind of our start. And that's also why I fundamentally like all the small startup businesses, is because I think the grassroots is what this country's all about. And that's where all the ideas come from and all the craftsmanship comes from. And I was supported early on by Bob Bainbridge and also John Glick to mention, even though we were this tiny company that bought very little materials, they paid a lot of attention to us. And I always said, I appreciate that. And if I get the chance later in life, I want to make sure I spend the time with the guys that nobody else is taking the time with. And so I think fundamentally that's something the company that I've learned that Bob Bainbridge has infused the company with is to care about everybody, respect everyone the same, and one of my philosophies too is that people always just say the customer is always right, and I don't agree with that, because I don't know if anybody's right all the time. I get told that enough in my life. I'm not always right, but I think the fundamental thing, and I think Ripstop has done a great job with its customers, is a customer might always be right, but they deserve to be treated with kindness and respect. And I think if we carry forward with that, then that's all we really need to do.
I think the MYOG industry feels akin to challenge because of the fact that you are a DIYer at heart. I think you're showing that you want to be in a small place, that you're testing, and through your personal endeavors, you're outside, you're testing things, you're always putting your finger into, a new place to see what it's like. And I think everyone sees that, and we are appreciative of that. And we're super stoked to be carrying this fabrics. I mean, Ultra's been a huge hit so far, and we're getting prepped to do the ECOPAK release here in the coming weeks. And we're really excited about that. So all in all, Hale, thank you for sharing the last hour and 15 minutes with us. We've had you standing here talking in your warehouse. I'm sure you're exhausted, but this is incredibly appreciated.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. It's great to see you guys, and I hope to be back in North Carolina soon.
Awesome. Well, we're really excited to have you whenever that does happen. Thanks again, Hale.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.